You are watching or listening to the Good Morning Gwinnett show, hosted by Audrey Bell-Kearney, bringing you your daily dose of business and technology to educate, empower, and inspire small business owners. Be sure to subscribe to the show today.
Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, all my Gwinnetians out there in Gwinnett land and all of my friends around the world. Beautiful day here in Gwinnett County. It is still chilly. We got snow coming, all of that good stuff. It's crazy. I don't even know what's happening, but we got snow coming. We got snow coming on Friday. We got more freezing temperatures, 28 degrees. But today is beautiful, so I won't complain. I got a great guest coming up today. We're going to be talking about what it means to keep the American dream alive. Because right now, a lot of people know and feel that the American dream is under attack. It's crazy. I don't know what's happening. I saw this girl. She was crying on I think she was on TikTok, and she was, I'm talking about boohoo crying. She was so upset, and she was just saying how she feels so, so bad. Like, we're living in a third world country. And so my guest today that's coming up, we're going to be talking about, what does it mean to be a state representative for the state of Georgia? How does that affect us as regular everyday citizens in Georgia and around the United States? And what does that mean for the American dream? Is it dead? Can we revive it? Can we bring it back to life? Because right now, a lot of people are not feeling that way. So without further ado, I would like to welcome to the stage Miss Brenda Lopez.
A very good morning to you as well, and to everyone that's listening to us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to talk to you today. Now, for the people who don't know you, Brenda, tell them a little bit about who you are, how you got to this point.
All right. Well, I guess I always think about myself. When I was 5 years old, I grew up in DeKalb County, K through 12. And also in my first year of going into elementary school when I was 5 years old was when I first came here to Georgia to reunite with my parents. And so for me personally, that's sort of how I identify myself going forward, just going through life circumstances of having to help parents and then eventually neighbors and then eventually anybody that may ask for simple, basically interpreting services, right? Just going through anything from calling a utilities company to turn on the lights, to filling out employment applications for friends of myself or my family, and obviously helping a lot with my family through just whatever process needed to be done. So that happened at a very young age. I figured by the time I was about 7 years old and I learned to speak some English, I just kind of got into that circumstance of being available as much as possible to help people. And eventually I ended up graduating from Cross Keys High School in DeKalb County. And when I started college at Georgia State, I moved here to Gwinnett County, and I've lived here now for the past 20 plus years. And all through that process of going to college and then eventually I went to law school in upstate New York at Syracuse University. Uh, that sort of, why I say that I always think back of being that little girl on Buford Highway, is that sort of stayed with me. It got rooted, right? Because it was a roots situation where I always felt that furthering my education in part was a way to be able to help other people in whatever capacity that a new life experience would allow me to have. And so since I was a college student, I was involved in a lot of local nonprofit organizations as a volunteer student. In fact, during college, there were all several rallies and protests that were being put together at that time that I helped as a student organizer to put together. And ultimately, when I left law school and I came back home, right, back to Georgia, and continued to practice law, primarily did at that point immigration matters. I did that for about 10 years. And then most recently, I was at the DA's office doing work that revolved not only around the prosecution work, but actually sort of second chance opportunities, accountability courts that are for people that fall under three categories, whether that's veterans, people with mental health concerns, and people with different addiction concerns. So again, that's sort of a little quick background about both the education aspect and
Your mic just cut out. Brenda, your mic cut out.
I
Okay, I
think
hear
that
you now.
okay. Sure. Okay. I mentioned that the last part that I mentioned was that, so for me, it always feels that my education and professional background has always kind of been intertwined with that initial personal experience that I had. And not only of, mm, having the responsibility as a young girl to try to be as helpful as possible, but in part also, I've had a lot of people along the way help me, right? Giving me advice, guidance, whether it was an hour of their time, whether it was financial support of any kind, in whatever way. I didn't just wake up one day and I was an attorney, or I was in law school. It was really an effort of a lot of people along the way that I was fortunate enough to meet. So I think that all of those things sort of combined between my own personal life circumstances, the fact that I've been very fortunate to have a lot of great people in my life. Some people, that weren't necessarily at the time longtime friends, right? It might have been a teacher, it might have been, a school counselor, might have been somebody that even with a short period of time has been impactful in my life. So um, anything sort of that I do now, whether it's on the volunteer side or whether it's professionally, I do so with those two thoughts in mind of one, helping as much as I can, and two, remembering that many people helped me.
So I want to ask you, because I've learned a lot in the last couple of months talking to officials, local officials, government officials, people who are running for office, people who are running for judgeship. Just learned a lot, and I've talked to so many of our people who are in positions right now on this show. Explain to the people what a state rep actually does, because I think for a lot of us, we don't know. We just know that we either like that person, we're going to vote along party lines, we're going to vote because we have a bias against that person. We really don't know like what you guys do. And I give you a prime example. Last week I had Kat Hodrick on. She's a new councilwoman up in Snellville. And when I think about that, they call you council person. So when I asked her, well, what can you do for what does the council do for small business? And what she said was, there's no budget, there's no line in our budget for small businesses. So really nothing, right? Because that's my heart. My heart is small businesses, women businesses, solopreneurs. That's my heart. Explain to people what state reps actually do, because I remember when Donna McLeod was a state rep, and I remember she just broke down. We were at an event for someone who was running for, I think, sheriff or something, and she just broke down and cried. She was like, we're running across the street from here to there, and they're changing things, and we're trying to get from the state house to this. But it was crazy. And I said, really? She's like, yeah. And she said, and then they lock our hands because we don't have a chance to vote for certain things, so we can't get anything really passed, right? So explain to people what that means.
Well, I will start by saying that yes, government bureaucracy, in the sense of like the structure and the layers of government, so it's difficult, right? And it becomes encumbrant in a certain way, for especially for everyday people to kind of navigate. And one of the things that I tell people all the time is, people will usually say, well, the government this, the government that, the government didn't do this, the government didn't do that. And I always tell people that the government does not exist. And I say that because the assumption is that all government is the same, and they all kind of work together, and they all kind of function together. And that is actually the least correct thing about sort of government structures, right? And so what we have, as you mentioned, right, we have, especially at the elected level, we have what I break down into like your city council, if you live within city limits. If you don't live in city limits, or if you do, then you're at the county level of government. And after the county level of government, you're at the state legislature level of government. And then after the state legislature of government, you have the federal level of government. But now, even those layers amongst let's just say the different cities or the different counties, they have different budgets, they have different charters about what duties they are able to do or not do, and what sort of resources the electeds at the city or county level have. And in the state legislature, similarly, in a sense, different states obviously have, I know live you get people from other states. So different states have a slight variation on how their state legislature works. So I'll speak to us here in Georgia. Our state legislature is considered a quote unquote part-time position, which means that we only have legislative session for about 40 days, somewhere between the beginning of January and the end of March, early April. So it's not exactly calendar days, but it's approximately within those 3 months that we have legislative session. That means that only during that time can bills be filed and then eventually have to be passed out of both chambers and be signed by the governor for them to become law. And so I say both chambers because our state house is similar in that sense to the federal Congress, which it means that we have a House of Representatives and we have also a state Senate. And in the House of Representatives, we have 180 members, and on the Senate side, we have 56 members. And now in Georgia, for the past probably now going on 20 plus years, we have had a Republican majority in the state legislature in both chambers. Obviously, that's in addition to the fact that that is also true for all statewide positions in the past, right? Until recently. Everything from governor down to all of your statewide constitutional officers, Department of Labor, Agriculture, tax, you name it, every level. And so what that causes a friction in, and what we're sort of experiencing now is that and I don't say this, quite frankly, I keep telling people, I don't say this as a partisan thing. I say this as a matter of fact, right? The legislation that we haven't seen passed that we support, or the values that some of us may support, whether it's expanding Medicaid, whether it is providing greater resources or child care support, or a better tax incentives that gear more towards working families, all of those issues that we sometimes also campaign on are very difficult to pass in the state legislature because it is Republican majority controlled. And often enough, despite the fact that we are elected individually, if we are elected under a Democratic platform, we don't have the legislative power or voting power to be able to pass large legislation or very impactful legislation that we want to see. So that's always the crux, right? That's why for me personally, when I first ran, and now that I'm running again, my commitment has always been to voter engagement and voter turnout, because we can sit here and talk about all the things we would want to see in our state, but until we have a majority of individuals that align with those values and those principles, we can't see those bills passed. And so that's kind of me giving you an explanation, kind of the structure wise, right? But the one thing that you mentioned in terms of what specifically a state house member does, or the duties that are generally assigned, first of all, the only constitutional obligation that session has to do is pass the state budget. And so I think that this is actually something key, regardless, quite frankly, about whether someone is as a Republican or Democratic elected, because at the budget level, now, to be fair, those individuals that usually get more, especially more meaningful things in the budget, obviously are Republican elected members. But nonetheless, as there are still many a times that I think that local issues are slightly less partisan. So the state budget is a place that we need to take a look at how our state is spending money, right? Now, as you mentioned with small businesses, the state does not usually, and very rarely, does it allocate money to X organization or X business or X person. Usually the most of the funding that the state allocates it to state agencies or departments, or some sort of local county or city jurisdiction, right? Including the school systems. So they don't allocate money to X school, but they will allocate state funding both again to the Department of Education at the state level and also to the different school systems throughout the county. So that's also important to note, right? That it's not this sort of line item for individualized spending, but the vast majority of the money that is spent, close to half of the money that is spent, is in fact on education funding. Again, at the very macro level. So that is the
If I
one
could just
thing state
interrupt one
representatives
second.
do.
Let me
Yeah.
just, I want to, because this is important. So when Carolyn Bordeaux was in the house, she was at a meeting with the SBA. We were over in Snellville. And we pretty much said to her, where's the money for small businesses? And she said, well, we give the money to, I don't want to say the mayor, because I think she said the mayor, but I can't remember because it was like 3 years ago. And it was like, so how does the small business know how to get the money? She pretty much said, rub elbows. That was pretty much what she said.
Well, at the
So for
federal level,
me, that's okay. Go ahead.
no, I would say at the federal level. So Carolyn was U.S. rep at the federal level, right, for the term that she served, and very similarly, right, the state budget is not, there's this money for X business. It really is very similar in the sense of like the money is usually allocated to the national federal U.S. Department of Small Business Administration. It's allocated sometimes maybe to these large investment programs like Invest Atlanta, or those kind of programs. Or a lot of it is administered again through different federal agencies, where then, or the local jurisdictions, right? Whether it's the counties, whether it's the state as a whole, because that we in the state budget count on federal funding as well. About somewhere between 20 to 30% any given year of the state budget actually takes into account federal funding that the federal government provides the state. So so in terms of that comment that you mentioned, it is about knowing the people that are then going to allocate maybe funding, especially to small business, right? Whether it's people in Invest Atlanta, whether it's again a jurisdiction. So it's a matter, and that is sometimes what makes this difficult, that if you're not already in the know of the people that are involved in that process, then you're not already in the know. And secondly to that, even if you know the groups or organizations or departments or agencies or whatever they may be that might be allocating grants or funding for different kinds of reasons, that doesn't mean that you have knowledge of the process on how those grants are dispersed, nor the relational context to have a more favorable outcome, right, for your request. So it is, I think, part of what I wish that chambers would do a lot of better job is creating those relationships, but it's not easy by any means. I'm not saying that, you're just going to waltz in somewhere. There's not like a list that says, here are all the places.
There should be one. There should be some way for small businesses, especially those who are struggling. We back in 2023, I think it was, there were two small businesses that came to Derek and I and said, we need help. We need help. We don't have the funding. Business is not booming. We need help. We tried everything we could to help them with what we had. We couldn't help them. And 3 months later, they both were out of business at the same time. Like, we got calls and they went out of business. So for me, if we have a surplus of money sitting somewhere, why not just start a small business venture fund that people can go to? Put somebody over it that they know this is where you go because this is the fund. How can I fight for that? Tell me what I need to do to fight for that, Brenda, because that's something I will fight for.
Well, and that is a good idea of something that you can do at all the levels of structure that I told you, right? Whether it is at the city level, obviously, revenue opportunities for cities might be more limited for some cities than others, right? A comparison of like city of Norcross is not just going to be the same budget as a city of Atlanta or a city of Savannah, right? So taking kind of those population sizes into account, But if a city may have the revenue resources to be able to do that, that's something that you can talk to your city council members directly. And one of the positive things about city councils is that usually you have to talk to maybe 5 to 12 people, right? And you got to find 5 to 12 people that are the electeds versus 180 people in the state house, and you needing 91% of their vote to get anything passed or pushed. And so and then same thing at the county level, right? Again, considering resource availability or revenue availability for a county size, there are county commissioners that you can reach out and say, hey, is there a way that we can put money from the budget to set aside to some sort of seed money for small businesses, or
Safety net.
maybe they want to get into the business of being, like you said, venture capitalists, right? So that is a conversation again with the county commissioners. And again, most county commissions have anywhere between maybe on the low end, maybe 5-8 commissioners to a high end of some 15 or so, but obviously a smaller group of people. So that is, again, but you have to then advocate for your specifically, especially it's more favorable if you're actually from that city, if you're actually from that county, and that you come with people that support you from those specific jurisdictions. Now in the state, at the state legislature level, it's slightly different again, because we're talking about the size, right? But ultimately, would it be impossible to try to get something similar into the state budget? No. But the state budget is very tight, right? I think that is something more, I think at the state level, something we would consider more with the local agencies, right? Whether it's the Department of Agriculture, whether it might even be with the labor commissioner, right? In a sense, maybe they can create certain programming. So at the state level, it becomes only a little bit more complicated in that what I mentioned is that it's harder to pinpoint who exactly could, one, have the budget, and two, can be accessible to reach out regarding ideas such as that. But it really would require, I think, at the state level, more of a sitting down session to kind of think through, right? And that's kind of how advocacy or stronger advocacy starts, right? You really have to game out who are the people that actually can manage these things. And I would say, similarly, investment groups, I've mentioned it before, like Invest Atlanta, would be kind of also that are not necessarily government related, but they do receive some government funding, whether it be from primarily the state or federal, that you could have these conversations regarding how maybe they could pool money. But it becomes the same thing kind of that we mentioned, right? You have to know that these resources, even if they became available, that they've become available. And what you mentioned about we should have just a running list, again, that's harder to do because of what I mentioned at the beginning, that there is the government. There are multitude of different agencies, departments, and individuals that head or lead these, whether they're government agencies or quasi-government organizations, right? So that's harder. In addition to
it sounds like I need to create an AI tool to scrape all the organizations, all the government facilities, all of the everything, just scrape them and find out where the money is. That's what it sounds like.
That would definitely be a very good first start. As much of information that can be found that way. And I would say that's true of if there is the technology now with AI to do something similar, because if you look at local chambers as well, especially like the county chambers and kind of the larger chambers like the Atlanta Metro chambers, they may tend to have more information, I guess, at least within their wheelhouse of people that they collaborate with, right? So, but that is definitely, let's just say, that would be a very important project to do, even though it will be a very time-consuming project, in addition to even with AI technology helping, right? But I think that would be a good start to try to pull as much of that information together into one sort of resource.
So, I could talk about business all day, but I won't, because I know that's not just the platform that you're running for. What do you see? What are some of the problems you see in Georgia right now that you feel that you can handle, that you want to be a part of making better?
So I think I had started off earlier mentioning that, right? That for me, my we can again talk like you mentioned about issues, and quite frankly, like business development and especially entrepreneurship has in fact always been very important to me. I think it's a very it's a necessary source of growth and generational wealth, right? And I've seen it across the board for people, particularly for people that may not have or may not have or may not be interested in continuing some sort of your traditional kind of professional backgrounds, right? There are people that simply are entrepreneurs and at heart, and regardless of what sort of either educational or professional or trade background they may have. And so definitely that's a very important to me. I will say for me, a personal, what I always consider my own personal priority has been education. When I was in the state legislature now between 2017 and 2021, I served in the education committee, which is K through 12 committee. And again, I think it started off from what I mentioned earlier about background about myself. I think education doesn't just provide economic gratification, even though many a times we tell young people that if you go through finish high school and go to college or technical education or some sort of post-secondary education, that your likelihood of earning more is there. And that is true, and it's true most of the time, except of course with employment process, employment being what it is, and also student loans. But nonetheless, on average, the more education you have, the higher earning potential you have.
Do you think that's still true today, though? Because when I look at
that that is still true today, right? We are in a different kind of environment. Again, labor markets, employment markets are harder, obviously with the economic stale point that we've been in for these last couple of years, with the obviously inflation and the cost of things. It just seems that for all of us, money's just the money that we might have earned previously is just not enough. So but those are factors, external factors, that are pushing on the wages earned. But nonetheless, statistically, the higher education you have, the higher potential for income, right? Now there's your individual stories, which are different, right? Just like there's individual stories about you don't have to go to college and you can be successful, and that's very true as well. You don't have to go to technical school and still be very successful. But I'm just mentioning sort of on average. But what I was
do
going
you
to
think
say
we
about, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Do you think we need to change the education system? Because I feel like it's antiquated. I feel like the system that we have in place right now is not preparing our children for the future. I feel like it's antiquated. And I look and I give you a prime example. There was a guy. He had he's a C-suite exec. He put out a job that he was looking for people, and they rejected 500 people. He didn't know why they kept rejecting them, right? So he put himself in the system to see would it reject him, and it did reject him. And he couldn't figure out why. So they were working on a system that was antiquated. But here's the thing, they were looking at all of these qualified applicants based on paper, but the systems were saying they weren't good for them. When you think about something like that, do you think our education system is antiquated as far as how we're moving towards the future? Because if a machine is saying whether or not you're going to even get the face-to-face interview, and you look good on paper because you got all of the education, you got all of the degrees, you got all of this stuff, but the machine is saying, you know what, you got this one little life skill that's missing. You got this one. I told my daughter's an IT engineer. And I said to her about 6 months ago, learn how to do APIs, right? I do APIs all the time. I said, learn how to do APIs because that's going to help you. She did. So she got a promotion this month because of that. But it's the little tiny things that I feel like are going to, the people with all the education are being kicked out of the system because of these little tiny things. So that's why I asked the question, do you think we need to change our education system? When you look at China and how they're doing education, they're doing it way different than us. And they're bypassing us. They're leaving us in the dust. So that's why I asked that question.
Yes, so I would say for me, very few things are or, right? I don't necessarily think like there's or in the sense of like we have what we have now, or we change completely something different. I think it's more of an and. And it also depends on what you're trying to create with the school system, right? Because especially a lot of people mentioned, of course, India and China as churning out all of these engineers and churning out all of these doctors and science, based individuals. Um, and also in many ways kind of technocrats, right? People that kind of gonna process the process of what we are mentioning, the globalized government, whatever that globalized government may be. You know, but maybe the focus isn't enough on philosophers or people that are humanists or people that are creatives, right? In whatever sort of artistic way. They may not be churning out in part, I think part of my concern with what can change in addition to are things of having better civic education, including history, and not only history of our country, but international history and global affairs, right? Some of these things that I think that we've long been missing. So the question about education is complicated because it's a matter about, like, what are you prioritizing, right? Or what is it at the end of the day that you want to turn out in your in your society. And so for me, that's why I don't think that it's like, oh, we have to fully push a full engineer doctors only kind of society. I don't think that that's also necessarily the best way to serve as an education system. But I do think that there is lots of room for improvement. One of the things is, and one of the reasons, for example, I'm on the foundation board for Gwinnett Technical College, and I do believe that there are people that different, very lucrative trades is an important and necessary skill set, right? That actually turns a lot into entrepreneurship, especially on trade skills. And so I think that there's and even in the more, I would say, I guess, liberal arts kind of subjects, right? I do think that one of the things that we need in our school system, starting at high school level, and we've seen this a little bit with sort of like the academies that are served in some of our county schools, is having more hands-on real skills, we say, right? Hard skills, right? Versus just the soft skills, as you were mentioning. Yeah. And so I think there is a need, and especially even at the college or let alone postgraduate education, I think there is a need for greater apprenticeship, right? Versus just simply, here's the theory and here are the principles, and and kind of a even in philosophy, right? Even if you are doing social work, even if you are doing counseling, things, if you look at areas like that, they actually require them to intern in the kind of work that they're expected to do. Right. So I think that we do have a way that we can improve upon, I would say, not so much change completely, but rather improve upon the more variety of education system that the U.S. tends to focus on or has focused on in the past. One of the other things that I would also, have been churning in my mind for the last couple of years is this idea, even in our K through 12 education, is there's quite frankly not been a need to have summer school, right? And that, I think, if you look comparatively to other countries, especially at this point, countries that don't have summer schools, how far more effective it is for students to be able to have more frequent, longer, short breaks than it is this, whole like month and a half, just to be out. And so I think that those are things that can be changed, right, to improve. Both providing more of hands-on skills, more apprenticeship style education, and also making kind of changes like that, like us having year-round school. The other thing that I would say regarding, especially on the technology, science, medical side of education, I do think that we need to continue to highlight those as careers. We do have a lower number in our country comparative to a lot of other, I'll say specifically European countries, to try to be comparative in terms of like economic and societal levels, right? So I don't think that we that we don't do that. I think we do that also, right? So I do think that there has to be a greater focus on providing at least those options of opportunities for young folks to think about as well in their future, right? Um, and so I think it's a combination of everything. That yes, I do think that our education system has to be improved upon from where we are.
So you're out there, you're knocking doors, you're talking to people, and people don't know why they're voting. They think they're voting because they're voting along party lines. They think they're voting because they need cheaper eggs, but they don't really know what they're voting for. Because if they did, we wouldn't be in the situation we're in right now, right? How do you talk to that person who just says, I wear red and this is why I'm going to do this, even though they're cutting off their nose to spite their face? How do you talk to that person? How do you get them to understand, sir, if you vote this way, you're going to vote yourself out? Because I remember having a conversation with this woman. She came to it was an election year, which was so funny. It was an election year. We had a breakfast, and everybody in the room was a politician pretty much, except for myself and her. And I felt bad because it was a Democratic room, and I kind of figured she wasn't. But she asked me to have coffee with her later at a different day, and we had coffee. And I said to her, "How could you vote against yourself?" And she said, "What do you have to give up for that?" And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "If I vote along the lines you vote, I got to give up privacy." And my mind instantly clicked, and maybe this is the tech side of me, privacy, right? That's what I instantly thought. We don't have any. She said, I take a lot of supplements, so I don't have to rely on state funded Medicare medical services. I take a lot of supplements, is what she said. So I take care of myself. And I said, oh, okay. In my mind, I'm thinking, but if a car run you over, not a supplement in this world gonna save you. But that was the thinking. And we had a great conversation. We talked, and I just left everybody. I didn't try to convince. I just asked a question because I couldn't understand that. When you talk to these people and this is their mindset, it doesn't. How do you get them to say, "I'm gonna choose me"? So I have to
Well,
choose you, so I can choose me.
right. So I think that one of it starts with what you mentioned, right? One of the reasons that I like to go knock on doors is because it, it, because of that personal contact. I think at least it starts bridging something versus just hearing something on social media or just seeing something on
Mhm.
television, or if even for that matter, if I send a brochure, right? It's not the same as a personal conversation. And so and of course, doing that at the doors, I ran to people that immediately especially have some sort of party affiliation, right? I will tell you, most times it's hard to have a conversation in terms of being willing to hear me out, right? But fortunately enough, there are a couple of times I think when they see you that you're a person, I'm just coming to say hello. I just want you to know that I exist and who I am. And I think that, and that is the problem, right? That I've told folks now, like these last 10 years that I've been involved in the political space, there is no magic bullet, at least that I have found, that is going to just magically change people's opinions. But I do know that when you have conversations with people a little at a time, and unfortunately, this is a slow process, is when you start seeing a willingness to hear each other out. That's on the positive end, right? That I think that this is a hard work that is very it's very hard to quantify, right? People can't see that effort because it's a small incremental change, very small incremental change to go person to person. um but also, unfortunately, and I say unfortunately, is sometimes when you get to the current situations that we've seen recently with people being quite frankly, like murdered by government agents, right, of any
Mhm.
kind. When you start seeing SNAP benefits that were held off for a while. When you start seeing these things, individuals that they may not realize, like you mentioned, right, how it is that they're voting against their own interests, start seeing how they're voting against their own interests. um, I think that is a far widespread way to start changing people's stance, or at least softening people's stances. But I say that unfortunate part about that is that it requires these very bad situations that we're living through, right? For people to start kind of realizing it. So unfortunately, I think that as things have gotten worse in that sense, for those that might want to have a perspective of a more humanist perspective, right? And a perspective, like we keep saying, right? Things being quote unquote legal, or things being quote unquote okay under the law, have never ever been necessarily moral or justice, right? Legality and morality and justice are not the same thing at all. And so unfortunately, when we once we start getting to this point where we are now, I think you can have those conversations more readily with individuals. And I really have seen that. I mean, personally have seen that when I speak to people and they're like, we don't agree about X, Y, or Z, but we also, don't agree with, children being taken, right? Or incarcerated. I mean, people can see some things that are finally become personal to them, can see how these things aren't proper, right? They can see like, hey, you know what? I didn't realize how much I actually do use different government agency benefits, right? Whether it be food assistance, whether it be any sort of, and especially now, many of us are experiencing, and this is across all sorts of economic levels, are increases in medical insurance costs, right? Yep. And so once people start seeing these things, and unfortunately, sometimes it does take it to personally affect you before you're willing to open up listening. Right. And I think that we are in a very tough time right now, but I think this time is also a time that we must talk to people more. Talk, right? Not yell at, yeah. and not vilify as a whole group, but talk to people individually. And so like I said, that I've found no magic bullet other than to try to have those conversations with individuals.
One of the things you talked about on your campaign page was the American dream. Do you think the American dream is still alive? Do you think we can make America dream again? Because I feel like right now America is crying, and they're crying loud. Do you think we can make America dream again and feel like hopeful again?
I think the American dream and the idea or promise that we have about America, again, I don't think it's an external thing, and it most definitely does not come from the government, right? I think that when we think of always the American dream or the American promise, I think about you and me, right? We individually, as people, push for improvements and bettering things, right? And the opportunities that slightly had improved, and in many ways have greatly improved through the literal blood, sweat, and tears of the civil rights movements that we currently now have come to enjoy, and now we're seeing kind of etched back, right? Again, those opportunities, those benefits, those rights, those liberties, and what we started to consider as even constitutional parts of this country that are now being eroded, they did not just come on their own, and they were definitely not provided by the government, right? They were hard earned by individuals, many individuals that we may know and now consider iconic and heroes to ourselves, to our country, but also by a lot of unknown heroes, right? The unsung heroes that also worked in that same process. And so that's what I sort of think, right? The American dream, American promise is only alive and will only continue to exist as long as we keep pushing for it. I think right now, we're seeing a couple, especially in Gwinnett County, but throughout the country, a lot of students walking out, high school students. And so for me, despite the fact that I get lots of calls and text messages a lot about people that are like, what's happening? What are we going to do? And everything's falling apart. I also get a call, from a young high schooler that says that they're trying to organize a walkout, and she just kind of wanted to some advice or feedback about it. But for me, that gives me the energy. That American dream and American promise, that's alive in that young lady. And the fact that she is willing to put this together, especially at a young age, to know that their country is in crisis and she wants to do something about it, so that ultimately is what I think where the dream and promise exists.
Well, I want to thank you so much. We got about 1 minute left. What are your closing words for the state of Georgia, and specifically, in which district do you represent? Will you be representing?
So I'm running for House District 98. That's basically unincorporated areas of Norcross, and I have a little bit of unincorporated areas of Wilburn and Tucker addresses. I tell folks basically it's the Indian Trail, Jimmy Carter, Beaver Ruin exits off of 85. But sort of in closing thoughts, what I kind of want to share that we were mentioning about how do we get the structural changes that we want, the government agency changes that we want. We have to continue through the electoral process, right? So long as, quite frankly, we continue to have a more or less functioning electoral system, we have to go out and vote. It's just there is no other way. And many a times, unfortunately, especially in the last, I would say 2020 and 2022 and 2020 election cycles, many a times the people that are elected sometimes because by the number of people that did not vote, right? That are eligible to vote. I'm talking about only eligible registered voters, right? And so I know that, that casting of one vote in the at the ballot seems like it doesn't truly have impact and significance. And I think most of us probably have seen that little cartoon where it's just like one little fish, right, just moving around, and that one little fish is just one little fish in the ocean. But then when they kind of collectively pool, that then they can defend themselves and protect themselves, right? And I know it's really, really hard to feel that when you go to the ballot or when we're asking you to go vote, but it's true, right? If you and me and that young lady, soon to turn 18, and everyone collectively that feels that the country is going in the wrong direction, if we put ourselves out to go out and vote as a whole, we can do better. I will say for the last 2024 presidential election, at least for us in Georgia, for those of us that wanted Vice President Harris to win, we lost the state by 115,000 votes. For a statewide election, that is a very, very small margin. And I tell folks, just in Gwinnett County alone, if we had a 2% increase in turnout in 2024, Gwinnett County alone could have made up 115,000 votes for the whole state. So, and that's only if 2% additional people had voted. So that is sort of why, yes, every single person does in fact matter, but it matters when we all collectively participate in the voting process.
Yeah. All right. Listen, guys, I hope you enjoyed this. This has been really good, Brenda. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're busy. I know your boots on the ground, knocking on doors. So I appreciate you stopping by and spending some time with us this morning. Good morning, Gwinnett. And next show is, listen, she's here in Georgia. I'm in Georgia. But I know the show, my highest listenership last week was Singapore. I was like, go figure. Like, that was crazy to me. But listen, thank you for so much for what you do. Thank all of our elected officials for what they do. And I say this all the time. I had a conversation at the beginning of the year with someone, and they gave me some information that was very disheartening. But I understood that sometimes the people we think got all the power, they don't have all the power. Like you said, there's no government. There's no government, right? And so that gave me a new respect for people's position. It gave me a better understanding of position. And I think when you know better, you do better. That's what Maya Angelou said. I didn't say that. Maya Angelou said that. When you know better, you do better. So I ask all of you to know better so you can do better for yourselves, your family, and your communities. And go out and support Brenda. Forget about party lines. Do you really need eggs? Do you really need bacon? Do you really need your SNAP benefits? That's what you need to think about. Forget party lines. What do you need? If that's what you need to vote for the candidate that's going to give you what you need, not what your grandparents voted for, why they voted for that. What do you and your family need right now? That's what you got to vote for. So thank you again, Brenda, for that. I'm going to drop your website up here. Tell people how to reach out to you.
Sure. All social media platforms are Brenda for Georgia, all spelled out, Brenda for Georgia. And then the website that you have up, brendaforgeorgia.com. The contact information, the phone number on the website, on social media, that actually all goes directly to me. So feel free to reach out anytime.
All right. Thank you guys so much. Brenda, thank you so much. And good luck. I'm rooting for you. So good luck on that.
All right. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. Hey, listen, guys, hope you enjoyed that episode. I'll be back again next week with another great guest. And no, not all my guests are going to be politicians, but, right now it is what it is. And this platform has to be used for good and for educational purposes, because I feel like when you know better, you do better. In order to know better, you got to know what people are saying. We got to know. Like, I'm out here trying to figure out, as the president of the Gwinnett Women's Chamber of Commerce, I'm trying to figure out where the money is for my folks. That's what I'm trying to figure out. So when elected officials and possible elected officials want to come on the show and talk, that's my question always, even though I'm very, very much in favor of a better educational system. I'm very much in favor of a better healthcare system. I'm in favor of everything that's going to help people to be better, help people live better, like really live better. So I'm in favor of it all. So you can kind of guess which side I'm on. I'm on the side of the people. That's what I am. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'll be back again next Wednesday, same place, same time. Be sure to subscribe to the channel. Tell 2 friends. It's free. Doesn't cost you a dime. And share the episode. Share the episode with somebody you know. Share the episode. If you got a person that's a great guest, you think will be a great guest, have them email me, audrey@goodmorninggwinnett.com. If you have someone who can come and talk on this show about what's going to make us better, what's going to make people more successful, what's going to make small communities grow, what's going to make everybody come together as one to be better. Better is the word. Have them email me, audrey@goodmorninggwinnett.com. All right, I'll be back again next week. Same place, same time. Until next time, my friends. Until next time. Make it a great day. Bye, everybody.
You've been watching or listening to the Good Morning Gwinnett Show, hosted by Audrey Bell-Kearney, Monday through Thursday at 10 a.m. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to the show today and share it with your friends by going to www.goodmorninggwinnett.com.